Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. This is part 2 of our interview with Geoff Cook.
In order to make sure that I had enough activity to be able to then seek investment down the road. So, a lot of times there is a fuse and you only have so much money and you basically have to make it work before that runs out. And so, the way I think about it is a lot of it comes down to retention.
CEO of many apps, but the Meet Group on NASDAQ is the symbol MEET. Is that right, Geoff?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Meet. Yeah.
Meet. Sorry. So if you missed part 1, please go back and hear about that. Go through some of the background that we've covered already. But as we jump into this next part here, Geoff, I want to continue talking about what we left off on part 1 and talking about novelty and this idea of being Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year, starting a company in your Harvard dorm room that you sell for millions of dollars at age 24, sell your second company for $100 million. Meet has a market cap today about $400 million. I brought up that it's obvious that you know something about customer acquisition, and I would love to hear more about this thought of novelty, because as I think about our consulting firm, we have so many different kinds of clients. We have all the people who've been on the last 250 episodes of our podcast. I hear a real temptation for people to say, well, this worked for them, so I'm going to try and learn from that pattern, and we're going to do that too. And there's an element of wisdom to that, but there's also the problem of, but that's already been done.
Right.
Can you talk about novelty and unexpectedness and legitimate differentiation instead of just claimed differentiation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think that you essentially, and it's a hard answer, but you kind of have to do both, right? You have to be aware of the competitive landscape. What, in my case, what is Tinder and Bumble doing? Because there are some interesting innovations and also a more broad landscape. What is Facebook and Instagram doing? Because that kind of defines what best practice looks like. But if that's all you're doing, there's not really much hope for you. So I tend to look at it as you have to be doing some things. Certainly borrowing good ideas from big players is a good idea. It would be hard to say anything other than that. If you're not paying attention to the broader landscape, you're doing yourself a disservice. But to your point, you're not going to break through and really build anything unique if that's all you do. Now, there is an interesting, I think, caveat to that, which, and I mentioned kind of these businesses are somewhat like reinventions. Like my yearbook became Meet Me, went from VC-backed company to then a public company, and there's these periods that are very different. What we've been focused on right now is basically adding this live streaming service, and it's not like we went up to the mountaintop and said, oh, here's this amazing idea that we've had originally for the very first time. No, actually, I was in Beijing in 2016 and had spoken with a number of companies and a number of people there, and got to see this company Momo that was really just growing so fast, adding live streaming to dating. And I would say I didn't get it for the first 2 or 3 months of this, and didn't jump on it instantly. It wasn't like even after I saw it, I thought, oh, what a great idea. It was kind of after they kind of started talking about just how powerful it was. And then I started to understand the product intuition behind it, which is in these dating and meeting communities, there's often a period of time where there's just not enough people to chat with, where not enough chats are coming in. And in those periods of time, live streaming is something that's very similar to the reason that you're there on that dating meeting app to begin with, which is to meet new people. You get some connection to other human beings. And so that was so to answer long-winded way of answering your question, we actually found the model in China for this, and we were the first to really bring it to a Western audience, both when we did it for Meet Me for the U.S. and for Lavu when we did it in Europe. And so the novelty was because we were actually paying attention at that time to something that was going on in Asia. And China and live streaming China has spent so much more on R&D in live streaming than any company in the United States. That is the streaming world right now. And I would argue increasingly of the social world. Facebook's following what WeChat is doing. With respect to its messaging strategies. And so, China is a source of a lot of novelty. It's a huge market that allows rapid innovation, rapid things to either fail or succeed. And so, I think we don't, now that we've built this live streaming platform, though, we don't say, okay, what else is China doing? Let's go do that. Because it's not as easy as that. You have to kind of say, well, how does this work for my audience, what my users are doing, and what can I be creating that might not exist in China? Because now we've kind of closed a lot of the gap with the product. What do you build now that China may not have thought of, or at the same time, we have Chinese speakers on staff just to help us dissect what is going on in China every month. So we'll dissect all the core live streaming apps and what they've added and changed.
I love it. Well, changing gears just a little bit, when you think about this track record that you've had building and selling companies, now the CEO of a large publicly traded company, there's so many folks. I mean, I think about, you and I went to school pretty similar years. I think about how many folks nowadays are interested in entrepreneurship compared to back when we were in university. And it's a lot more desirable. It's a lot more mainstream. It's cool according to the media now, right?
Yeah.
When you think about how many of the rest of us would like to achieve what you've achieved, what do you think you've done different? Because there's a lot of people who want it bad. There's a lot of people who work hard. What do you attribute some of your success to, or what are some lessons the rest of us could learn from?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. I mean, I think that
it's 1,000 things, I'm sure, but
you always hear luck, and that's because I started in 1997, and it's kind of the beginning of e-commerce. And I was a student at Harvard, but I happened to be in a good time where across my hallway, literally someone is building an e-commerce site for golf clubs. And so entrepreneurship was kind of in the environment. I got to work for an internship that helped me understand at least like what went into it. And I tend to be this kind of person who just keeps pushing the ball up the hill, right? So like I would say I'm pretty good at dealing with kind of the ambiguity of not really knowing exactly where it's going to end up, but knowing or at least having some good product intuition for what I want to be doing. And so I would say I'm guided by that product intuition quite a bit. So, I'll be single-minded on 2 or 3 things and let other people worry about, everything else, as the business grew, at least. I had that benefit. I come from a product perspective on just about everything I do, and I tend to go very deep in the weeds on the things that I think can drive the most substantial beta. Now, sometimes I'm wrong, but that tends to be how I've done it. I've also asked myself the question a few times, which is, it often seems to me that big companies and even Facebook and others like that have a hard time, creating what that next standalone app would be, despite having all the money and all the cross-promotional capabilities and all the teams and smarts in the world, and why is that? Why is the guy in the
why do you think?
And I think it's because good ideas often take so many different turns to get there. Right. So like a big company with 6 Scrum teams, or in our case, like 12 plus Scrum teams, the engineering teams, they're going to have to prioritize the projects that get done. And it's going to be hard to say, well, your idea, it failed two times over the last, so you spent like the last 24 months failing and you want to fail again. It's very difficult to resource that. versus saying when you're an entrepreneur, gee, I'm $500,000 into this idea and I'm not ready to let it die. There's something here, so I'm gonna go do this instead. And this capability to kind of change and people call it pivot. Often it's not a dramatic pivot. It's kind of but it's enough of a change that has you kind of looking at the full field and saying, you know what, if I do this, maybe I'll have a better chance at success. And I think that has a lot to do with it. Like having a gun to your head, and not having blinders on where you say, well, I have to build something that looks exactly like this or else it doesn't work. I've seen and heard entrepreneurs in big gaming companies talk about like actually doing something like what I just said. Like, here, I'll take a good product guy. I'll say, here's your budget, and you have 3 years, build something, right? So, and like that's sort of what you need to do to come up with like what innovation. Like you need plenty of time to fail, and I think it's hard for big companies to resource that because often you have so many things that aren't going to fail in front of you, like that you think are very high likelihood of driving that ball, up that hill a couple percentage points. And so how do you resource a thing that's likely to fail when you can resource a thing that's probably good for $5 million next year?
So many great points there, having some single-minded focus, treating it like you have a gun to your head, but without blinders on, that kind of unwavering, like commitment to the product, it sounds like, is this actually doing for the customer what I say it does for them? Is it actually as helpful as we think it is? So many great elements there. I want to ask you, in your mind, if you had to apply those elements to marketing, for instance, there's so many folks, like you said, in the early days, they're scrappy, they're getting customers any way they can. And then maybe they get some funding or maybe they get some success and now they want to grow at a higher rate. And, if they're not a high ticket item and they can't, it doesn't make sense to have a big outbound sales team or something like that. And they're looking at the world of marketing. In your mind, I'll just make the observation. There's so many folks that have gone crazy with their marketing bets and it puts them out of business or something like that. What's some decision-making criteria, or what advice would you have for, having the guts to try something new, to experiment, without being silly?
Yeah. I mean, and I would say in the early days of my yearbook, I felt like I was being silly with I was spending, a lot before we found that quiz strategy. But I also felt the need to spend at least at some level of threshold in order to make sure that I had enough activity to be able to then seek investment down the road. So, a lot of times there is a fuse and you only have so much money and you basically have to make it work before that runs out. And so, the way I think about it is, a lot of it comes down to retention, right? So, at least in consumer apps, and which is what I typically build, what is your day 2 retention? What is your day 30 retention? If you can't get your day 2 retention to, 40 to 50% or better, you probably don't have a good idea, right? Like, and it might be expensive to go figure that out. You have to go build the product. You have to fill it with some modest set of users. But if you don't think that you have a pathway there, because you're out of the gate, you're at 15 to 20%, it's hard to come up with something that's going to drive retention more than 2 or 3x.
Yeah.
But I tend to think of it as, look, maybe I'll spend $10,000. There's a new idea. I'll spend $10,000 a month on marketing. I'll spend $20,000 a month on an offshore team to pursue the idea. And if I can get day 30 retention to 20%, then I've got an absolute blockbuster. Now, the odds of getting to day 30 retention to 20%, very, very, very low. But 10 or 15% wouldn't be so bad, and that might at least be viable. But if you're looking at it, well, it's probably not even viable. And so I don't need to spend another $100,000 to figure that out.
You cut out for just a second there, Geoff. Can you say that last thing one more time?
Oh, so I wouldn't need to spend, if you're at 5 or 6% retention, you wouldn't need to spend an extra, $100,000, extra $1 million to figure it out. So, if you're really focused on retention metrics in the funnel, you don't have to spend as much. You still have to spend a lot, and it's going to be painful whenever you're spending on something that you're not sure is going to work out. But it helps you de-risk it at a much lower scale of payment. And then if you do get to some very big retention number, then you say, okay, now I have the mousetrap. Now I'm going to go try to fill the top of the funnel in various ways.
So I want to think about this idea of filling the funnel in various ways. You've focused on the product. You are getting those retention numbers that are making sense. You do have a good idea, right? Let's say you get to that point. Now, when it comes to filling the top of the funnel, and this is just an observation, tell me if you see it different. It seems like there's a lot of folks who they've got this appetite for risk when it comes to the engineering of a product and spending the money to try to build something that we hope people like. And we're getting our MVPs that we're testing and stuff like that. And then when it comes to a world they're less familiar with, like sales or marketing, that maybe that isn't their background, I notice sometimes some clamming up. Like, you talked a little bit ago about some willingness to fail so that you can learn, what marketing recipe actually fills the top of our funnel. Any advice for helping people have some comfort zone experimenting and having some failure in this, in an area they feel less confident about, like marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's whatever that strategy is, and I think it comes down to product intuition. So, marketing strategies also come down to product intuition, right? And so, give an example that's fairly recent today. So Podcoin, right? How do you get a podcast player? There's Apple is playing in the podcast space, Spotify. How do you get anyone to care about some new podcast player? And so you can pay people in loyalty points, and maybe that's a novel idea, but how do you get that concept to come out into the world? And so, what we have found is that if you trade promotion of your right now Podcoin has 700,000 listening minutes a day. If you say, well, we're going to promote the podcasts that work with us, that have claimed their podcast and maybe want to reach their community here. Here's what we ask of you: do a mid-roll or do a post-roll. You do some form of notice to your community. Suddenly they're getting some value.
And are you guys paying on a CPM rate, or what are you paying on there?
We're not paying anybody anything.
Okay.
We're basically just saying, look, we're going to give you listeners if you work with us and do a mid-roll. Now these aren't necessarily well-known podcasts, but it's an example of what I'm getting at, which is like, can you get your users to, especially your early users, to become marketers, right? The consumer app space, like that's really what you want. And there's different ways of designing that. In the early days of Facebook hyper-virality, people were just all about the Facebook platform and can you drive sharing within that. There was a day and age of email address book virality. Most of those days are over, right? Like platform virality is not there. And that's why kind of all that's left is this novelty variety, this novelty kind of virality. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about that, but then also thinking about, okay, how do you get these early users to want to share this novel concept? Because, okay, it might be novel, but that doesn't mean that anyone necessarily cares. How do you spread it?
Yeah, right.
Right.
Interesting. Well, it's funny how many different levers, right? Like there's so many elements of that equation. And I really appreciate you kind of laying it out that way. It makes me want to like go back and listen to my own episode and write all those down and start scoring myself on different ones as I think about stuff. Well, maybe to close out here, you get covered by the media a lot. What's a question that people don't ask you that you wish they would, or what's a soapbox item? What's something that you're passionate to talk about? Maybe to close here.
I mean, I think I'm typically asked mostly about, and I would say I'm probably not very covered by the media, but I'm typically asked more about EBITDA, revenue, what products are moving. And I think that one of the things that like just super interests me right now is just kind of this live streaming dating show, right? Like I think people think of live streaming as your mother on Facebook live streaming or you're live streaming a sporting event for your kid, or like this kind of low quality streams that have limited audiences for them, a non-zero audience, but limited. And, I think I'm imagining a world where, the next version of the dating show or American Idol, the Gong Show, these are going to be live streams. They're going to be on your mobile phone. It's not going to be about the television. It's going to be a live streaming kind of universe. And I think we're at the earliest stages of this still. Like I think what we've only seen kind of live streaming get into social communities in the context of the social communities that already exist, but we haven't really seen live streaming with maybe a couple exceptions. Like HQ was kind of an early example of like, wow, this is kind of cool. Like, this is like almost like a Jeopardy or kind of Wheel of Fortune thing, but I can play it and maybe win. Like I think that's going to become much more evolved over the next 5 to 10 years.
I love it. Well, again, appreciate all the time to come share with us some of the things that you've learned. Would really encourage people to go to the Google Play Store or go to the iTunes App Store and check out Meet Me. Connect with you guys on social. And anything else, Geoff, that you put out there for people?
No. I mean, I thank you for having us, for having me, and I'll continue to just be kind of focused on product and trying to drive the ball up a little bit higher.
I love it. Okay, thanks everybody. Well, that's it for the episode. One other thing I wanted to tell you about, if you'll remember the guys from Convoy in episodes back, Ken Free and Trent Mano, I went on one of their CEO trips to New York and I met a guy named Brent Thompson, very successful entrepreneur. He was former CEO of Jive Communications, big company now, I think $300 or $400 million. Anyways, he started a new company called blipbillboards.com. I'm super stoked they're a sponsor now. But I remember a year and some ago when I met him, I thought it was genius. Instead of having to buy 6 months or a year's worth of billboard for thousands of dollars, you can buy 8 seconds at a time for like 10 or 20 cents. You pick what billboard you want it on, what time of day you want it to run. And it just puts so much power in the hands of marketers and CEOs who want to try something and see if it works. You can buy as many or as few as you want, change it as many times as you want. I think now our podcast is being advertised on billboards in like 18 different states because we have these guys as sponsors. We're pretty excited about it. Hope you check out blipbillboards.com. Thanks.